He held a gas station receipt for $14.38, the last purchase his wife would let him make before she took the keys. "You're embarrassing me just standing there." He looked at her across the hood of the car, the engine still running. "Vanessa, don't. I'm done explaining this to you. To your face, to my mother, to everyone who has ever asked why I married someone like you." He didn't answer. He was holding the receipt and looking at the name printed across the top of it, not the station's name. His own. The one that appeared on 12 separate holding company registrations in 4 countries, none of which his wife had ever thought to look up. She didn't know that. She got back into the car and pulled onto the highway without him. And here is the part that will keep you watching. Within 41 minutes of the moment she left, 7 black SUVs were pulled off that same highway, and 43 men in dark suits were standing in a gas station parking lot in Dalton, Georgia, looking for Marcus Hale. What was on that receipt that she never looked at? If you're new here, this is where real stories live. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Let me go back, because none of this makes sense without it. Marcus Hale grew up understanding one thing about inherited money: it made people into something different. Not always worse. Sometimes just unrecognizable. His grandfather, Roland Hale, had built Hale Capital Group from a single commercial lending office in Chattanooga into a holding enterprise worth approximately $1 billion by the time Marcus was born. Roland Hale was the kind of man who drove a 1987 Ford pickup until the frame rusted through, not because he lacked the resources to replace it, but because he understood something about performance. That the moment people knew what you were worth, they stopped seeing you and started calculating. Roland had told Marcus this at 14, sitting on the porch of the family's primary residence in the mountains above Lookout Valley, a house that looked like a modest farmhouse from the road and contained, behind its plain exterior, art that belonged in a museum. Roland Hale died when Marcus was 19. He left everything: the holding companies, the trusts, the property portfolio, the 12% stake in a private infrastructure fund that generated roughly $31 million a year on its own, to Marcus, structured through 4 separate legal entities managed by the family's attorney of record, a woman named Cecilia Frost, who had worked for Roland for 22 years and knew every account number by memory. Roland's final instructions, delivered through a sealed letter Cecilia handed Marcus the morning after the funeral, were characteristically brief: do not let them see the machine. The men who need to display their worth are always the ones who have the least of it. Marcus took this seriously. More seriously than his grandfather might have intended, perhaps, but the events of the following years would prove Roland's instinct correct in ways neither of them could have anticipated. He structured his public identity around a consulting firm, Hale Advisory Partners, which was real, produced real revenue, had real clients, and appeared to any casual observer to be a mid-level commercial consulting practice with 8 employees and a modest downtown office. It was not a shell. Marcus worked there genuinely, because Roland had also taught him that idle men became careless. The firm billed approximately $740,000 annually. This was not a number that impressed anyone at the kind of dinner parties Vanessa enjoyed attending. He met Vanessa Corbin at a fundraiser in Chattanooga 7 years before the gas station, a Preservation Society event for an old theater downtown, the kind of event where the admission was $85 and the wine came in bulk and the room smelled like old wood and effort. Vanessa worked in marketing for a regional hotel group. She was precise in her movements and funny in a dry, observational way that Marcus found instantly compelling. She talked about her work with neither false modesty nor exaggeration. She mentioned once that her mother thought she should be doing something more impressive with her degree. And then she rolled her eyes and refilled her own glass. Marcus thought, this one sees through things. He was right, for a while. The first 4 years were not without difficulty, but they were genuine. 2 people building something with the resources that appeared to exist, which meant a comfortable but unremarkable life. A house in a neighborhood where the homes were nice without being extravagant. Dinners that didn't require reservations 2 months in advance. Vanessa worked. Marcus worked. They traveled twice a year on trips that Marcus paid for, though he booked them through channels that kept the pricing opaque. He was careful. He was always careful. The motif he kept from his grandfather during all of this was a small brass compass. the kind used for drafting technical drawings, with the steel point worn to a near-perfect edge from decades of use. Roland had kept it on his desk every day of his working life. Marcus had inherited it along with everything else, and he kept it in the top drawer of his own desk at Hale Advisory, where he could see it whenever he opened the drawer and needed to remember what he was doing and why. The marriage began to shift in the 3rd year after the wedding. Not dramatically, but in the way that foundations shift, incrementally and underground, the movement invisible until something cracks at the surface. Vanessa's mother, Patricia Corbin, had never entirely approved of Marcus. Patricia was a woman of specific opinions expressed without hesitation, and her opinion of Marcus Hale had been formed at their first meeting and remained essentially unchanged. He was pleasant, possibly intelligent, almost certainly not enough. She communicated this not through argument but through steady accumulation, a comment about the kitchen countertops that might be due for an update, a comparison between a colleague's husband and his income that was positioned as anecdote but functioned as benchmark, a habit of asking Marcus about his work with the precise vocal quality of someone who has already decided the answer will be insufficient. Vanessa, to her credit, had resisted this for years. Marcus had watched her navigate her mother's volleys with the same dry eye roll she'd deployed at the fundraiser, and for a long time he believed that resistance was structural. He was wrong. It was effortful, which meant it was draining, which meant that as the years accumulated and the social circles around them expanded to include people with larger salaries and more visible emblems of success, Vanessa's resistance required progressively more energy than she was willing to spend. The specific moment Marcus identified later, the one he returned to when he was being honest with himself, was a dinner party 14 months before the gas station, hosted by a couple named the Fenwicks, whose house had a wine cellar Marcus assessed at roughly $180,000 and whose primary conversation topic was their recent renovation. Vanessa had been seated next to a man named Colton Mercer. Colton Mercer arrived into Marcus's life the way men like Colton always arrive, with studied ease and a specific object designed to be noticed. In Colton's case, it was a watch, a Patek Philippe Nautilus in rose gold, approximately $75,000 at retail, positioned on his wrist with the casual inattention of a man who had owned expensive things long enough to be bored by them. Colton ran what he described as a strategic investment platform based in Atlanta, which appeared from the outside to involve raising capital from high-net-worth individuals and deploying it into commercial real estate and emerging market opportunities. He was 39, unmarried, and spoke about his projects with the expansive, unhurried confidence of someone who had never had a proposal rejected. He talked for 37 minutes about a development project in Miami that he claimed would return 18% annually. Marcus listened. He noted that the projected return was exactly the number that historically made sophisticated investors suspicious and unsophisticated ones enthusiastic. He noted the watch, the suit, the name drop of a private aviation company dropped into a sentence about a site visit as if it were ordinary. He noted the way Colton looked at Vanessa when Vanessa laughed, not warmly, but appraisingly. The way a person looks at a door they plan to eventually open. Vanessa laughed 3 times during that dinner. Each time it was at something Colton said. Driving home, Marcus asked her what she thought of him. She said he seemed interesting. She said it facing the passenger window, and there was a fullness to the silence that followed. A silence that carried specific weight. The weight of a comparison being made and not shared. Colton Mercer began appearing in their extended social circle with increasing frequency over the following 4 months. He attended 2 events that Vanessa organized through her work, which meant Vanessa was the one who had invited him, or at minimum had enabled the invitation. He texted her, initially under the visible pretense of discussing a charity auction she was coordinating. The texts became less sparse. Marcus saw 3 of them by accident, not by searching, but because Vanessa had left her phone face up on the kitchen counter and the previews were visible from across the room. The 3 previews he saw were not on their face incriminating. What they were was warm in a way that professional correspondence is not warm, abbreviated, casual, with the rhythmic shorthand of 2 people who had developed a private register. Marcus did not confront her. He was not ready, and more specifically, he was not prepared, and these were not the same thing. Being not ready was emotional. Being not prepared was strategic. He set the texts aside in his mind the way his grandfather had set aside difficult decisions, not avoiding them, but refusing to act without the full picture. Patricia Corbin came to stay with them for 11 days in the month that followed. During those 11 days, she mentioned Colton Mercer's name 4 times in contexts that suggested she had been briefed on him through channels that did not include Marcus. She also mentioned on the 3rd evening that Vanessa deserved the kind of life that matched who she actually was. Marcus was in the kitchen when she said it, within easy earshot, and he understood it was meant to be heard. He poured himself a glass of water, set the glass down on the counter without sound, and said nothing. It was during this same period that Vanessa began making small, specific adjustments to their household finances, nothing dramatic, nothing that would require a conversation. She moved $4,200 from their shared account to an individual account she had held before the marriage and rarely used. She did this on a Thursday, and Marcus saw the transaction on Friday morning when he reviewed the accounts as he did every week. He did not mention it. He wrote the date and the amount in a small notebook he kept in the same desk drawer as his grandfather's compass, and he turned to the next blank page. The discovery came on a Tuesday 3 days after Patricia Corbin's visit, and it came through 2 separate channels that arrived within the same hour. The first was a call from his accountant, a precise and undemonstrative man named Gerald Park, who had managed the visible layer of Marcus's finances for 6 years, and who had never, in those 6 years, called without an appointment. He called at 9:14 on a Tuesday morning to say that someone had submitted a credit application in Marcus's name through a process that had required, and somehow obtained, 3 pieces of documentation that should have been accessible only to Marcus or Cecilia Frost: a tax identification number registered to one of the holding entities, a secondary residential address connected to a property trust, and a digitized copy of a notarized signature page from a 2019 amendment filing. The application was for a commercial line of credit at $850,000, submitted through a third-party lending platform, and the listed co-applicant was Colton Mercer Strategic Investments, LLC. Marcus sat with this for a moment after Gerald finished speaking. He asked Gerald to hold the line. He opened the top drawer of his desk and looked at the compass for approximately 15 seconds. Then he asked Gerald to document everything and to send him the full application packet. He thanked Gerald. He ended the call. The second item arrived 22 minutes later, not by phone but through a discovery Marcus made himself. He had gone into the account management portal for the property trust, the one whose address had appeared on the fraudulent application, to verify that the login credentials had not been changed. They had not. But in doing so, he passed through the trust's document history, which he rarely reviewed because Cecilia managed it. And he noticed that a document had been accessed 17 days earlier by an IP address that did not belong to Cecilia Frost's office or to any of Marcus's own devices. The document accessed was the 2019 signature page amendment. The access timestamp was 11:47 p.m. He knew then, in the way you know things when the evidence arranges itself into a shape that admits only one interpretation. Vanessa had access to his home study. She was the only other person who had ever been alone in the room with his laptop while he was logged into the trust portal. Because there had been a night 14 months ago, before Colton, before the dinner party, before everything, when Marcus had fallen asleep at his desk and she had used his computer to print a document for her own work. He had not thought about that evening since it happened. He thought about it now. He sat without moving for 4 minutes. What he felt was not grief and it was not rage. It was the specific, hollow clarity of understanding something you had been half preparing for without admitting you were preparing for it. A clarity that has no warmth in it and no satisfaction, only the bare fact of the thing. He picked up his phone and called Cecilia Frost. "Tell me you've already heard," he said. There was a pause. "Gerald called me 8 minutes ago," Cecilia said. Her voice had the quality of someone who has set down whatever she was doing and given the problem her full attention. "I've already pulled the access log. I've already started documenting. How long until you can give me a complete picture?" 48 hours for everything admissible. "You have 36, Marcus said. "I need to know exactly what Mercer was trying to access, what he believed he had found, and where that information originally came from." "I already know where it came from," Cecilia said. "I just need to be able to prove it in a way that closes every exit." Marcus said nothing for a moment. Then, close every exit. She already had the documentation underway. Cecilia Frost had been suspicious of Colton Mercer for 9 weeks. Not for any reason she could initially articulate, but because in her 22 years managing Roland Hale's affairs and then Marcus's, she had developed a precise sensitivity to people who expressed interest in Marcus's personal life while probing, however gently, the structure of his business arrangements. Colton Mercer had done this twice in her presence, framing questions about tax structures and family estate organization as small talk at events where Cecilia was present as Marcus's legal representative. He had been smooth about it, he was always smooth. But Cecilia Frost did not confuse smoothness with harmlessness. And she had begun building a parallel record of Colton Mercer's business history 3 weeks before the credit application was filed. What she had found in those 3 weeks was a pattern. Colton Mercer had previously been involved in 2 other strategic investment platforms in a 5-year span, one in Nashville, one in Charlotte. Both had attracted capital from high-net-worth individuals through social proximity, meaning through the intimate social networks of wealthy families rather than through formal channels. Both had dissolved within 24 months. Neither dissolution had resulted in criminal charges, but both had generated civil complaints that were settled under non-disclosure agreements. In both cases, the source of the investor introductions, the person who had opened the door to the family, had been someone romantically proximate to a primary target. Not a stranger, someone trusted. Marcus read Cecilia's summary on a secured document she sent him at 6:47 p.m. the following day. He read the section on Nashville twice. He read the section on Charlotte once. Then he closed the document and sat in his office without turning on the lights until the room was fully dark. He thought about confronting Vanessa that evening. He had the information. He had, arguably enough, but he thought about what his grandfather had written in that letter, "Do not let them see the machine," and he understood that this principle applied now in a different way than Roland had intended. Colton Mercer did not yet know that the credit application had been flagged. Vanessa did not yet know that the document access had been logged. The window in which they were unaware of his awareness was the only window that mattered. He chose to wait. It cost him 3 nights of sleep, but he chose it. Cecilia spent those 3 nights working. She pulled Colton Mercer's LLC registration history, 14 entities in 6 years, 11 of which had been dissolved. She obtained certified copies of the civil complaint filings from Charlotte and Nashville through public records requests. She commissioned a forensic accounting firm Marcus had used once before to trace the origination of the document access back through the IP address to a specific device, a process that took 2 days and produced a MAC address traceable to a laptop purchased on a credit card registered to Colton Mercer's Atlanta office. She photographed the original credit application, the co-applicant filing, and the complete log of document accesses. She packaged all of it into a binder that ran to 218 pages. She drove to Marcus's office on a Friday morning and set the binder on his desk. "Everything in there is verifiable, admissible, and time-stamped," she said. She sat down across from him. "There's one more thing." He filed a second application. "I caught it this morning." He went through a different platform, used the same document set, and listed a different property trust as collateral, the one in Tennessee. Marcus looked at her steadily. "How much?" The combined exposure if both applications had gone through would have been $4 million. He nodded once. "What's the exposure now?" "Nothing. I had both flagged and frozen this morning before you woke up." "Neither will process." She paused. Marcus, he was using Vanessa to get close enough to pull the documentation, and then he was going to default on both lines, leave her holding the personal liability, and disappear into the next iteration of his platform. She was the means of access, but she was also going to be the person left standing in front of the debt. Marcus set his hands flat on the desk. He looked at the binder, he looked at the compass in the open drawer beside him, he closed the drawer. "When is the Fenwick Foundation Gala?" he asked. 3 weeks from Saturday. "Is Colton Mercer on the guest list?" Cecilia looked at him for a moment. "He is." "And Vanessa?" "She's on the planning committee." Marcus stood up. "Then we have 3 weeks, he said. "I want everything finalized and in the hands of the DAS office before that evening, and I need you to make one additional call." "To whom?" "My grandfather's personal security director. He retired 4 years ago, but he maintained the firm." Tell him I need a team available on a specific Saturday evening in Chattanooga dressed appropriately for a foundation gala. And tell him to send me 7 vehicles." Cecilia looked at him for a long beat. Then she nodded and picked up her phone. The Fenwick Foundation Gala was held on the 3rd Saturday of the month at the Chattanooga Convention Center's main ballroom, a room that accommodated 400 guests comfortably and was decorated that evening in the foundation's signature navy and gold. Vanessa had spent 6 weeks on the planning committee for this event. She had selected the centerpieces, approved the menu, and chosen the string quartet. She was wearing a dark green dress Marcus had not seen before, and she had not mentioned purchasing it. Marcus arrived 20 minutes after the doors opened, which was 11 minutes later than Vanessa expected him. He knew she expected him earlier because she had texted him the arrival time twice in the preceding week, with the specific energy of someone establishing a record. He wore a dark charcoal suit and the watch his grandfather had left him, a 1963 Rolex Datejust, not expensive by current standards but visibly old in a way that communicated something about time and inheritance that knew her. Flashier watches did not. He had the brass compass in his jacket pocket. He did not know why he brought it. He brought it anyway. Colton Mercer was already inside, standing near the bar with 2 men Marcus did not recognize and a woman who worked in commercial real estate Marcus had met once at a networking event. Colton was wearing a different Patek Philippe tonight, the steel Aquanaut, which retailed near $55,000 and was slightly more understated than the Nautilus, calibrated precisely for an audience that would recognize the brand without being alienated by overt ostentation. He was telling a story about a due diligence trip to Dubai. The 2 men he was with were nodding at intervals Marcus found, from across the room, rhythmically familiar. The cadence of men who have decided someone is impressive and are cueing their agreement accordingly. Vanessa saw Marcus come in. She did not cross the room to him. She lifted her chin in acknowledgement from 20 feet away and returned to the conversation she was already in. Marcus moved through the room with the unhurried ease of a man who has no performance to give, greeting people he knew. Declining the offered champagne in favor of sparkling water, stopping at a table near the center of the room where a retired judge named Harlan Beckett was seated with his wife. Harlan Beckett had been Roland Hale's oldest friend in the legal community, and he looked at Marcus across the table with the steady-eyed recognition of a man who knows exactly who he is looking at and has always known. "Your grandfather would be 78 this spring," Harlan said by way of greeting. "He would," Marcus said. He sat down. They talked for 9 minutes about nothing consequential. Then Harlan said, without changing his tone, "Are the cars outside?" "7 of them," Marcus said. Harlan nodded slowly. "Good." He looked at his water glass. "I always thought this would happen eventually. Not this specifically, but something. Roland built too well for it to stay hidden forever." Marcus looked across the room at Colton Mercer, who had shifted his position to stand closer to Vanessa's table. "It wasn't going to stay hidden much longer regardless," Marcus said. Harlan studied him. "How are you?" Marcus considered the question honestly. "Prepared," he said. The evening moved through its scheduled program, a program Vanessa had built, so Marcus knew its timing precisely. Dinner was served at 7:30. The foundation's executive director gave remarks at 8:15. The awards presentation ran from 8:30 to 9. The dancing and open bar followed. It was during the awards presentation, when the room's attention was directed forward and the ambient noise had subsided, that Marcus's phone vibrated once in his jacket pocket. He looked at the message under the table. It was from Cecilia. 2 words, "In position." He put the phone away and sat through the remaining 11 minutes of the presentation with the same expression he had maintained all evening, measured, present. Unremarkable, after the applause that followed the final award, as the DJ began and the room began to loosen, Marcus stood and walked across the ballroom floor toward the table, where Vanessa was seated with 4 members of the planning committee and Colton Mercer, who had pulled a chair to the edge of the group with the practiced smoothness of a man who always positions himself at the edge of groups he has not been invited into. He did not perform anything on the way across the room. He walked the way he always walked, unhurried, without announcement. "Vanessa," he said. She looked up. Something in her face adjusted, a microscopic rearrangement of expression, and he recognized it for what it was, the specific recalibration of a person who has been thinking about someone else and is now looking at the person they are supposed to be thinking about. Marcus, she said. I didn't know where you'd gotten to. I was talking to Harlan Beckett, he said. He looked at Colton Mercer. Colton Mercer smiled with the practiced ease of a man who has spent years deploying that smile to communicate confidence. Marcus, good to see you. I was just telling Vanessa about the Miami project. The returns came in ahead of projection this quarter. Did they? Marcus said. It was not a question. 18%. Exactly where I said they'd land. Colton kept the smile. You should let me walk you through the structure sometime. Given your background in consulting, you'd appreciate the framework. I think I understand the framework, Marcus said. He reached into his jacket pocket and set an envelope on the table between them. It was sealed and had no writing on the outside. Cecilia Frost asked me to give you that. The smile stayed on Colton Mercer's face for approximately 2 seconds. Then it stopped. What is this? He said. Open it. Colton did not move to open it. Something had shifted behind his eyes, a very specific shift. The shift of a man whose internal model of the situation has just informed him that the situation is not what it was. Vanessa was looking at the envelope. Marcus, what is this? It's a document summary, Marcus said. It covers 2 credit applications filed in my name and in the name of 2 of my family's property trusts, using documentation obtained through unauthorized access to my accounts. It also covers the investigative history of 2 previous platforms operated by Colton's firm in Nashville and Charlotte. He paused. The originals are in the hands of the district attorney's office in Hamilton County. They were delivered this afternoon. The table had gone very still. The planning committee members were looking at their hands or at the middle distance. Colton Mercer said, This is a misunderstanding. You've had 6 years to say something, Vanessa said, but she was looking at Marcus when she said it. Not at Colton, and her voice had gone very flat. Marcus looked at his wife. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he said, When did you give him access to the document portal? Vanessa, she did not answer. The absence of an answer was itself an answer. The IP trace ran the device back to his Atlanta office, Marcus said. But the access required credentials that were never written down anywhere outside this house. So the question I've been sitting with for 19 days is whether you understood what he needed those credentials for, or whether he told you something that made it seem like something else. Vanessa's hands were flat on the table. He said it was for the application. He said you'd agreed. I hadn't agreed to anything. Marcus's voice was even. He was using you to reach my assets, and then he was going to leave the debt in your name and move on to the next target. Colton stood up from the table. I'm not going to sit here, and he stopped. He stopped because the main ballroom doors had opened, and because the people nearest the doors were turning to look, and because 7 large men in dark suits had entered the room and were standing in a curved line near the entrance, and because behind them, coming through the doors with the unhurried pace of a woman who has never needed to move quickly because nothing has ever been allowed to start without her, was Cecilia Frost. She was carrying a black binder. Marcus watched Colton Mercer's face process what he was seeing, the suits, Cecilia, the binder, and watched the calculation behind his eyes play out in real time, reaching, in approximately 4 seconds, the same conclusion Marcus had reached 19 days earlier when Gerald Park called at 9:14 in the morning. There was no direction in which to go that didn't lead to the same place. The team outside, Marcus said in a voice that did not carry past the immediate table, is from my grandfather's security firm. They're not here to detain you. The DAS office will handle that through the appropriate channels. They're here because this is the moment I've chosen to stop maintaining a fiction that has become expensive. He looked around the table, at the planning committee members, at Vanessa, at the space where Colton had been standing. My name is Marcus Hale. My grandfather was Roland Hale. The company he built is valued at approximately $1 billion. I have managed that company from a consulting practice for 9 years because my grandfather taught me that the worth of a thing and the display of it are 2 entirely separate decisions. He picked up the envelope from the table. He set it in front of Colton Mercer. Cecilia will answer questions, Marcus said. I need some air. He walked across the ballroom floor. People stepped back, not because he demanded it, but because the room had already rearranged itself around the new information. He pushed through the ballroom doors and stood in the corridor for 45 seconds, looking at nothing in particular. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and closed his hand around the brass compass. The 48 hours that followed were, by design, thorough and unhurried. Cecilia Frost had not spent 3 weeks building a 218-page binder in order to see any portion of it challenged on a technicality, and she had not spent 22 years managing Roland Hale's affairs without learning that the distance between exposure and consequence is where the work actually happens. Colton Mercer retained an attorney by 10 o'clock the following morning. It did not help him significantly. The forensic accounting documentation Cecilia had commissioned traced not only the 2 credit applications submitted in Marcus's name, but a third application, one that had been submitted 14 months earlier before the dinner party at the Fenwicks, using documentation from a different target entirely. A woman in Nashville, recently divorced, whose social proximity to Colton had followed the same pattern: introduction through a mutual event, accelerating contact, access to financial documentation through personal trust, and then a credit default that left her holding $320,000 in debt she spent 2 years disputing. She had not known why she'd been targeted or how the documentation had been obtained. Cecilia's forensic accountant identified the mechanism within 6 hours of looking. The Hamilton County DA's office, once presented with the full binder along with the Nashville documentation, contacted their counterparts in Davidson County, Nashville, who had the civil complaint on record. The Nashville woman's attorney, reached by phone, expressed specific interest in the new developments in terms that suggested the non-disclosure agreement she had signed would be revisited with some urgency. Colton Mercer's LLC, Colton Mercer Strategic Investments, was frozen by court order within 72 hours of the gala. The 14 entities he had registered over 6 years were audited through a coordinated filing Cecilia supervised personally over a period of 4 business days. 8 of those entities had outstanding investor capital totaling approximately $2.3 million, money raised from individuals in Colton's social network through the same mechanism of intimate proximity introduction. Most of those investors had not yet experienced a default, because Colton's platform of choice was to raise capital, draw personal management fees at disproportionate rates, and keep the enterprise solvent just long enough that the collapse, when it came, appeared to be market failure rather than fraud. The forensic reconstruction of his fee extraction practices was not elegant work, but it was definitive. Colton Mercer was charged with wire fraud, financial fraud, and unauthorized use of identity-linked financial documentation in 2 jurisdictions. He made bail and wore the expression in the photographs that appeared online of a man who had not yet found the version of the situation that let him leave. His signature prop, the Patek Philippe Nautilus in rose gold, was inventoried as an asset in the civil recovery proceedings. It was appraised at $72,000. Vanessa's situation was documented differently, and Marcus had been deliberate about the distinction. Cecilia's binder separated Vanessa's conduct from Colton's in a section written with the specific precision of a document designed to be read by prosecutors. Vanessa Hale had provided credentials. She had done so after being told by Colton Mercer that her husband had authorized the access for an application process Colton was managing on his behalf. She had not independently verified this claim. She had not alerted Marcus to the request. Whether she had known that Colton's representation was false, whether her willingness to believe it had been willful or genuine, was a question the document did not answer, because Cecilia Frost was thorough enough to know that unanswered questions can be assets. The prosecutors looked at Vanessa's section, asked 3 questions, and moved on. She was not charged. Marcus did not speak with Vanessa directly for 11 days after the gala. On the 12th day, he called her at the number he had always used and asked if she wanted to meet. She said yes. They met at a coffee shop near downtown Chattanooga on a weekday morning when the place was quiet, and sat across from each other in a corner booth with cups of coffee neither of them drank much of. She said, "First, I didn't know he was lying." Marcus looked at her. He considered the range of responses available to him, the ones that would be devastating, the ones that would be forgiving, the ones that would be strategic, and chose none of them. "I know," he said. It was true as far as it went, whether the full truth was that she'd genuinely not known or that she'd chosen not to ask. That question, too, he set aside in the way he set aside decisions he wasn't ready to make cleanly. "The 9 years," she said. "The consulting firm, all of it. Yes, why, she said it without accusation, which surprised him. He looked at his coffee cup. My grandfather built something real, he said. And then he spent the last decade of his life watching the people around him calculate what they were worth to him. I didn't want to spend my life watching that. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I became the thing you were protecting yourself from. He didn't answer that. Some true statements don't require response. He paid for the coffee and left first. On the sidewalk outside, he stood for a moment in the February air, which was cold and dry and smelled like the river 2 blocks away. He put his hand in his jacket pocket and found the compass. Patricia Corbin called Marcus once after the gala, not to apologize. Because Patricia Corbin did not have that mechanism available to her, but to say, in a voice stripped of its usual authority, that she had not known the full picture of Colton Mercer's background. Marcus said he understood. He ended the call politely and did not receive another one. The 8 investors in Colton Mercer's platform were the aspect of the situation Marcus had spent the most time thinking about before the gala, before he had even decided how or when to move. 6 of them were individuals he did not know. 2 of them were people with whom he had peripheral professional connections, people who had attended the same events and moved in the same networks without ever knowing what Marcus actually controlled. All 8 of them had invested money that in the civil recovery proceedings had a realistic chance of being partially returned through asset liquidation. The liquidation process was projected, by the receiver appointed by the court, to recover somewhere between 40 and 65 cents per invested dollar. For the 8 investors combined, that meant a recovery shortfall of somewhere between $805,000 and $38 million. Marcus called Cecilia the week after the gala and told her to make those 8 investors whole from one of his trusts anonymously. Structured as a settlement contribution from an unnamed interested party routed through a neutral intermediary so it could not be attributed to him in any way that would complicate the proceedings. He told her to do this before the receiver's report was finalized. Cecilia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Roland would have done the same thing. I know, Marcus said. He also called the general manager of Hale Advisory Partners, his consulting firm, the one that was real, and told him that the firm's existing client roster and the 12 employees who served it would continue under the current management structure with no disruption. He had considered, briefly, whether the disclosure of his actual identity and resources would change the firm's character or its purpose, and decided that the only change it required was that he no longer needed to manage the appearance of its limitations. He increased the firm's operational budget by $400,000 annually and told the general manager to hire 2 additional senior analysts. There were 847 investors across the Hale Capital Group's managed funds, people whose money Marcus had stewarded, along with Cecilia and the broader team, without any of them knowing who Marcus Hale actually was or what the entity managing their capital looked like at the top. None of that changed. The structure Roland had built did not require Marcus's public identity to function. It required Cecilia's diligence, the forensic accountants, the legal entities, the quiet infrastructure of a machine built to last. All of that continued. The gas station in Dalton, Georgia, the one where Vanessa had left, became, in the weeks that followed, a place Marcus thought about more than he expected to. Not with anger, with something more like clarity. He had stood in that parking lot for 3 minutes after her taillights disappeared, holding a receipt for $14.38 in the February cold, looking at the light from the fluorescent canopy overhead, and he had felt, before the phone began ringing, before the SUVs arrived, before any of it, the specific lightness of something ending. Not everything that ends is a loss. Some things end because they were always arrangements rather than foundations, and the difference between those 2 things is only ever visible in the moment of departure. There is a brass compass on the desk in Marcus Hale's office. It has been there for 9 years in the same position, right side of the desk, top drawer, point aimed roughly north. It belonged to Roland Hale for 51 years before that. The steel tip is worn in the way tools wear when someone has used them every day for something real. Marcus took it out of his jacket pocket the night he came home from the coffee shop where he sat across from Vanessa for the last time, and he set it on the desk surface instead of in the drawer. He left it there. It sits in the open now, where he can see it without opening anything. The thing about his grandfather's advice, do not let them see the machine, is that Marcus spent 9 years applying it correctly and 1 year discovering its limit. The machine was not invisible because hiding it made it more powerful. It was invisible because Roland Hale had learned that most people, given the full picture, would stop seeing him and start calculating. He had learned this the hard way, through people he had trusted before he understood the mechanism. Marcus learned the same lesson, through different people at a different cost. What he chose not to do in the aftermath matters as much as what he chose to do. He did not go further than the law required with Vanessa. He did not pursue the maximum civil recovery available to him against Colton Mercer's dissolved entities when the lawyers suggested it would be possible. He told Cecilia to cap the recovery at what was needed to make the 8 investors whole, and not $1 more. He chose this not from sentimentality, but from a conviction he had been forming quietly for years before the gas station. Before the gala, before the first dinner at the Fenwicks, where Colton Mercer talked about Miami for 37 minutes. The conviction was this: the purpose of resources is not the demonstration of them, and the purpose of justice is not the extension of it past the point where it serves anyone. The 847 investors in Hale Capital Group's funds did not know their money was managed by a man who had spent 9 years living as if he didn't exist. They did not need to know. The 12 employees at Hale Advisory Partners did not need the additional $400,000 in operational budget to be meaningful work. They had been doing meaningful work without it. The 8 defrauded investors in Colton Mercer's platform needed their money back, not an attribution. Marcus gave them the first thing. He withheld the second. Both were choices, and both were his to make. If this story stayed with you, the part worth carrying is not the gala, not the SUVs, not the moment Colton Mercer looked at the sealed envelope and understood the situation he was in. The part worth carrying is the 19 days between the morning Gerald Park called and the Saturday evening in the ballroom, the 19 days Marcus sat with everything he knew and did not move until he was prepared. That patience is not a personality trait, it is a skill. Roland Hale learned it, Marcus learned it, the man Vanessa left at a gas station in Dalton. Georgia did not become someone different when the 7 black SUVs arrived. He was the same man he had been when she left. Same suit, same receipt, same compass in his pocket. The cars arrived because of who he had always been. The receipt was for $14, $38 because he had never needed it to be for anything more. We tell stories like this every week. Stories about what people are worth when no one is watching, and what happens when the watching begins. Subscribe if you want to be here when the next one arrives, and if you've ever had to stay quiet when every part of you wanted to speak, leave that below. We're listening.